Boy the Wandering Dog by Marshall Saunders. Chapter 25. The Boy Montmorency. A few days after Sir Edward's adventure, and when he was quite restored to health and ready for more experiences, for he was a most daring, plucky old man, who was a strange arrival in our home, I had been to New York with my dear mistress. She wished to call on some friends on Riverside Drive, and had invited me to go with Amarilla, for she knew I loved motoring. Fortunately, it was not a very cold day, and she took the touring car. I detested the limousine. She was all wrapped up in a big cloak, and Amarilla sat on her lap and kept her warm. I thought that of all the ladies we passed in handsome automobiles, not one had such a dear face as my own mistress. I sat on the seat beside her, and she tucked the rug all around my neck to keep me comfortable. Well, we had a very pleasant afternoon in the city. Amarilla and I did not go into any of the houses, but one lady sent us out some sweet cakes, which were very acceptable, for the cool air had sharpened our appetites. "Amarilla," I whispered in the little dog's ear, "where's the charm of the Drive, of Fifth Avenue, of Broadway? Gone, gone, except as lovely, lively places to visit. No more New York for me." Amarilla trembled and nestled closer against Mrs. Granton. She had always hated a city. How her little face brightened when we were well on the broad road leading to Pleasant River. How much we both loved that big house and the dear people who lived in it. "Amarilla," I said, "if our family moved back to New York, would you come too?" She gave a pitiful little squeal, but it was a decided yes. "Suppose they lost their money and had to live downtown, would you stick to them?" At this she struggled to her feet, wagged her bushy little tail, and barked sharply. "Hush, boy," said our mistress, tucking her up again. "You're exciting Amarilla." I persisted and whispered again. "Suppose your Missy," that was what she always called Mrs. Granton, "was poor, and had nothing to eat, would you go on the stage again to earn some money for her?" Amarilla hesitated one instant, then she began to howl very gently, very resignedly, but with great determination. She would be willing to make any sacrifices for the woman who had been so good to her. Mrs. Granton was annoyed with me. She knew that we dogs communicated with each other. "Boy," she said irritably, "if you make Amarilla uncomfortable once more, you shall go with Louis." This quieted me. I cuddled up to her, wiggled my body by way of apology, and did not say another word till we got home. I am a great talker, and often keep on when I know I should stop. When Gringo first knew me he called me the Wandering Dog because I had traveled so much, but after a time he called me the Wandering Dog because I told so many stories that hinged on each other. When the car pulled up in our own porte cochere, I followed Amarilla as she ran after her dear Missy to the library. Such a big fire leaped in the chimney, and before it stood Master with George Washington, all dressed up in his white velvet dinner clothes, for he was allowed to come to the table and sit in a high chair with toys before him. He got nothing to eat, of course. He had had his bread and butter supper at 5. Well, in addition to George Washington, there stood on the rug a boy about a year older than George, and Master's face as he surveyed him was a study. He was a kind of a caricature of a petted darling. I understood at once that he was a poor child masquerading as a rich one. I know the poor smell. Somebody had taken great pains with his toilet. He had on a little plush cap with a gilt tassel. His coat was green with gold buttons. His shoes were a pale blue. His little hands were dirty, but his gloves sticking out from his tiny pocket were quite clean. That was so like poor people, to have clean gloves and dirty hands. He seemed to have no handkerchief, and was sniffing violently at intervals. Master was grinning. "Read this, Claudia," he said, handing a slip of paper to Mistress, who had sunk into a chair and was examining the child with wondering eyes. "Mr. Granton and Lady," she read aloud. "Dear friends, raise the boy as your own. He is good blood. His name is Montmorency." Mistress looked amazed. "Where did he come from?" she asked. Master shook his head. "I don't know. Bessie says when she was bringing our boy in a short time ago, this child came strolling up the avenue toward them, clutching this piece of paper in his hand. Bessie read it, then ran down the avenue as fast as she could, but there was no one there." "Little boy," said mistress, "where do you come from?" He turned his small, pale, rather intelligent face toward her, and said something that sounded like "Nourish." Mistress looked despairingly at her husband. "What is your mother's name?" she asked. This time he uttered a single syllable that sounded like "Granch." "Da has come home," interrupted little George gleefully. "Why, he doesn't speak as well as our baby," said mistress. "What shall we do about him?" "He's a present, evidently," said master. "George, come here," said mistress, and she took her own child on her lap. Then she went on, "We don't know what sort of a place he's come from." Master pressed the electric button beside the mantel, said something in French to mistress, and when the parlour maid came she received instructions to take the little stranger away, have him thoroughly washed, his head included, his clothes folded up and put away, and other ones put on him. "I wonder what the mystery is about him," said master. "Why should any one try to foist a child on us anonymously, when we are so ready to help any one? I can't understand it." "I understand it," said mistress softly, and as she spoke she stroked George's fair head. "It's some poor creature who cannot provide for her child. She looks at our child with envious eyes. She thinks if she gives up her boy, we may do for him what Stanna has done for Syria." "Do you think that is the explanation?" said master. "But in Stanna's case everything was open and above board. I don't like this mystery, and I don't care to be dictated to with regard to the size of my family." "Let's find out the mother," said mistress. "It will probably be an easy matter." It wasn't an easy matter. Master put several detectives on the case, but the affair had been arranged by some unknown person with infinite skill, and they could not find out one thing about it. No one thought of appealing to me, though I had guessed immediately where the boy came from. Master, of course, thought of King Harry, but he was useless, for the child's tracks led right to the station, and the station meant New York City, and the hound would be of no use there. He had found the lost child in the country that he had been searching for when Sir Edward was missing, but a city with its multitude of tracks bewilders any bloodhound. The evening the child arrived there had been about him a strong smell of a place I did not know, but also a faint suggestion of a place I did know, especially about his face, his hands, and the piece of paper he carried, and that place was the Bluebird laundry. We dogs have every person, every locality listed in our world of smell. I had been to the laundry several times with my master, and the mingled odor of soap suds, cooking, and the personal scent of the women there could not be mistaken by me. These detectives that master employed had no highly developed sense of smell. They were following trails suggested by their eyes and ears. Master was a long time figuring out my interest in the child, but finally it dawned upon him. I was always sniffing about the little stranger, for I wanted to help my dear mistress. She was such a good mother, and I hated to see her troubled. Her loving heart, so warm toward all mothers since she had had a child of her own, had prompted her to take young Montmorency right into her own nursery, but she did not enjoy doing so. One day when I was following her about the house, she came suddenly into the nursery and stopped short, gazing at the two children. There stood Montmorency, dressed in a dainty suit of pale blue, uttering a succession of queer, uncouth sounds which all seemed to begin with G, and teaching a vulgar little trick to her beloved George. The trick wasn't very bad, but George was so much cleverer than Montmorency that he added some details of his own that made me grin, but which brought a frown to her face. She caught George to her and sat staring at the little stranger. After a while master strolled into the nursery. "That child belongs most decidedly to a different stratum in society," she exclaimed, "a much lower one. and she told him about the trick, which was a spitting one. "I believe you're right, Claudia," said master thoughtfully, and he too stared and stared at young Montmorency, who was polishing off his funny little nose on his clean tunic. I ran toward master and pushed my paw against his knee, a habit I have when I wish to attract his attention, or have a conversation with him. Of course this is not good manners for a well-trained dog. All dogs should keep their paws on the ground where they belong. But I was allowed this liberty by my kind master, and I took care never to abuse it. "By Jupiter!" he cried, which is the nearest he ever comes to a swear word. "I believe Boy has nosed out something about that child, Claudia. Please keep George quiet for a few minutes." Master fixed a steady gaze on me, and I stared full into his eyes. We were concentrating. "Boy," he said at last, "that child comes from New York, doesn't he?" I barked once, sharp and clear. "You smell a New York smell on him?" said master. I barked twice. "Yes, sir," that meant. "I certainly do." "Riverside Drive smell?" asked master. I looked disappointed and turned my head away. "Smell of Ellen's home?" pursued master. No, this child had never been near Ellen, so I said nothing. "No uptown suggestion?" said master. "Downtown, then." I was tremendously excited. I was leading him on. I barked wildly and danced around the room. "Getting warmer," said master, who was becoming excited too. "Now, where have we been downtown together? In my office, Boy?" No, no, he was on the wrong track, and my face fell. "No office clue," he went on. "French café, then. Perhaps a waiter's child." Wrong, wrong, and I said nothing. "The settlement house? Or the day nursery?" No, no, poor master. Why could he not guess? He mentioned ever so many places downtown that we had visited together, and he was so slow at getting to the right spot that I in despair lay down on the floor, put my nose between my paws, and pretended to go to sleep. "He finds you very stupid, my poor Rudolph," said mistress slyly. She loves to tease him occasionally, and she was following his questions and my answers with intense interest. "Let me make a suggestion," she said at last. "There is one place you never used to visit, but that you go to quite frequently now. Is it the Bluebird Laundry, Boy?" I barked, I screamed with excitement, I ran to her and licked her slippers and her hands. Oh, the clever woman! "By Jupiter!" said master again. "This looks like magic. Now let us find the woman. Is it Perky Moll, Boy?" The matron in the laundry is a lady who is the widow of a former friend of the Grantons. She is full of fun, and has nicknames for the girls which she uses sometimes with master, but which the girls themselves never hear. Well, it wasn't Perky Moll, and my excitement passed away, and I looked cast down. "Is it Jumping Jenny? Troublesome Doll? Mrs. Willy Nilly?" And on master went over a long list. At last he had mentioned every woman in the laundry except the right one. And just here I may wander long enough to say that the dreadful woman with the child that we met one night on Riverside Drive was not there. She had died, and her child was in the country with a farmer's wife. Now at this point, when master was puzzled, my clever mistress interposed again. She had a scent as keen as old King Harry's about matters where women and children were concerned. "Is it old Jane, the cook, Boy?" she asked softly. Now I was in ecstasy. I couldn't stop to lick anyone. I yelled with glee and tore round and round the nursery. "Upon my word," said master slowly, when at last I pulled up, "Boy has jumped at the Jane suggestion. But she is too old to have a child. Maybe it's her grandchild." Mistress didn't say anything, and he went on affectionately, "My clever little dog, my clever brother dog, you are worth your weight in gold." This made me feel and act foolish and modest, and I calmed down and went to lie at his feet. "Old Jane," he repeated soberly. "Poor old Jane. What's the matter, Claudia?" Mistress was crying softly, but at his question she flared up. "Can't you see?" she said wildly. "Oh, can't you see, you obtuse man? That nightmare of a woman, she has no teeth, her eyes are all red, she looks clean, but so thin and starved." "She is a cook," said master. "She has nearly killed herself working for her child," said mistress. I remember the dreadful hunger in her eyes one day when you took me to the laundry. She stared at me in the kitchen. She slipped upstairs and watched me from a doorway. She tore the child from her arms to give me to bring up. Oh, poor soul, and cruel, cruel society to so wound a mother heart." "We pay her well," said master. "But the money has gone to her child. She has been boarding it somewhere. Oh, Rudolph, go buy her some teeth." Mistress laughed and cried in the same breath, and finally she had to go and lie down. She kept on chattering hysterically about the woman who went without teeth to buy clothes for her child, until master became quite anxious. "You are making a mountain out of a molehill, Claudia," he said. "I cannot think that your suspicions are correct." "They're not suspicions," she said excitedly. "They're verities. Go to town. You'll see." Master thought he was done with New York for the day, but after dinner he had to post off to the laundry, where he found that everything mistress had said was correct. Poor old Jane was not half as old as she looked. She acknowledged that no one in the laundry knew that she had a child, that she had been boarding him ever since he was a baby, that she wanted him to be brought up a gentleman, that she had sneaked him out to Pleasant River, taking infinite precautions not to be discovered, and that she had actually spent nearly every cent of her wages on this beloved child. I went to town with master, and I shall never forget the sight of that poor thin woman as she sat in the matron's office answering master's questions. Her indifference, almost stupidity about her own welfare, her quick mother wit and shrewdness about her child, excited my most intense admiration. When master finished questioning her, he said, "Jane, I have a plan to propose. I hope you will agree to it. You should have left here long ago, but we kept you because you begged to stay. Now you will remain in New York only long enough to get a set of teeth." Here he stopped and smiled a very pained sort of smile, and looked hastily from the nice plump matron whose big blue eyes were full of tears. "After you get your teeth," he went on, "you will come to Pleasant River. I have a cottage to let there. You shall have it, and Montmorency may live with you. Your skill in cooking will support you. I will see to that." Jane began to mope in a dull sort of way. She did not cry. Her red eyes looked as if she had shed all the tears she had to shed. She said she would rather his wife would keep Montmorency and she would stay in New York. "That I cannot consent to," said master, and he got up to show his decision was final. Jane wasn't a bit grateful. Her mania for her boy's advancement socially made her fight against coming to the country, and kick hard at living in the pretty cottage master fitted up for her. Master and mistress paid no attention to her tempers. They went on and coaxed and petted her, till finally she began to get her health back, and then she became more reasonable. All this happened a few months ago, and now she is the leading caterer of the countryside, and is a comfortable, decent mother, bringing up her idolized boy in a very sensible way. He goes to Mrs. Waverlee's school, and I think will make a very decent man. Jane never gushes to the two persons who have so befriended her, but I heard her one day tell the woman next door to her that she would walk over red-hot kitchen stoves if it would benefit Mr. and Mrs. Granton. I seldom hear any one thank master for anything he does, but it makes no difference to him. He just keeps on doing good, thanks or no thanks. I may say in closing Jane's story that she got the finest set of artificial teeth that New York could afford, and for a while the dentist had her wear things called plumpers, to make her thin cheeks stick out. Now I hear from Montmorency's dog, who was one of Weary Winnie's pups, that Jane threw the plumpers in the trash can, and we can all see that she is visibly better and has some color in her cheeks. The tailor's dog, Beauty Beagle, says that her master is getting sweet on Jane because she is such a good cook. The tailor is a cute little man, about as fat as a lead pencil, and not much to look at, but he has a good heart and would make a fine stepfather for the redoubtable Montmorency, who is learning to talk quite well. Beside that, he has true views of life. One evening when I was passing by Jane's cottage, I heard him say to her, "You ain't on the right track." I stopped to listen, for I am interested in Jane. "Yes, I be," she said. "I want my boy to be a good dresser." "It ain't the outside alone that counts, Jane," said the tailor. "It's the inside, too." "And you a tailor!" she said contemptuously. The little tailor was pretty decided, and he went on. "You can make Montmorency a gentleman as well as Mr. Granton can." "Now tell me how," she said anxiously. "Learn him to be meek," said the tailor. "Learn him to act like a man. Learn him to be bossed, so he can boss. To treat very merciful any poor folk and dumb critters that are under him. To be clean inside and out. To get a first-class education, and to wear a tidy suit of clothes." Jane didn't say anything for a long time. Then she remarked, "That's like a picture of Mr. Granton. If my boy could be like him, I'd be suited." End of chapter 25.
Chapter 26. 3 weeks ago, I was just about to bring this partial story of my life to a close, when something very tragic, yet not altogether unexpected, happened to me. It began with a lie. I was sitting one sharp, cool afternoon all alone up in the Bonstone Orchard, thinking what pleasant homes Gringo and I had, and how few worries we experienced. A dangerous thing for a man or a dog to do, for something is sure to happen, when Reddy O'Mare came trotting round the corner of the barn. Reddy is a bright red, cocky Irish-American terrier who lives on the next place to the Bonstone, a magnificent estate called Greenlands. "Hello, boy," he said gaily. "Hello," I said soberly. "This is the second time you've been here today." "Twice for me means twice for you," he said in his impudent way. "Look here, Reddy," I said. "I'm Gringo's best friend. He doesn't like you, and he's laying for you. He says if you come over here once more and sneak Weary Winnie over to Greenlands, he'll wallop you." Reddy laughed. "Gringo's an old fool," he said gaily. "Sure, Winnie likes a frolic with a dog her own age." "She has dogs of her own age here in her own home," I said. "But all the dog world likes to wander," he said with a wink, for he knew the story of my career. I smiled. I couldn't help it. He is so merry, so full of tricks. However, I thought it my duty to warn him again. "Look out for Gringo," I said. "Gringo is an old soldier dog," he said. "He bosses too much." This was true, but Gringo is my best friend always and forevermore, and I was not going to discuss him with this carefree wag. "Sure, you ought to pity me," he said. "Shut up in that big house with 40,000 servants, but never a dog to play with." "I do pity you, Reddy," I said. "I think it's very hard for your master to go to the city and leave you all alone with the servants who don't pet you. You know you're always welcome in our home." "But it's the forbidden game I always want to play," he said, with a spring in the air at a passing fly. "Here comes Gringo," I said, looking toward the house. "Let him come," said Reddy, who was no coward, and he flopped down on the grass. The old dog came sagging along. Weary Winnie was some paces behind him, and when she saw Reddy, she dashed ahead, crouched to the ground, and got all ready for a frolic with him. Gringo went right up to Reddy. "Stand up," he said. Reddy stood up, and Gringo took him by the throat. I thought he would kill him. I was first in terror, then in agony. Reddy was very valuable, and if he were killed by one of the Bonstone dogs, it would make bad blood between Greenlands and Green Hill. I was also irritated with Gringo. He was too severe with the young dogs. I ran up and down. Would no one come? Not a soul was in sight. I galloped toward the house, then I had a sudden thought and ran back. Gringo still had Reddy pinned to the earth, then I offered silence. "Gringo," I whispered after I leaped close to his ear, "your boss is having a fit in the dining room." Gringo never uttered a sound. He just let go and raced to the house. His private vengeance was thrown to the wind when it was a question of his dear master. "Skedaddle, Reddy," I said as he floundered to his feet and staggered against Weary Winnie, who had sat watching the attack in her quiet, bulldoggy way. Reddy skedaddled, and this time Winnie did not go with him. I might have skedaddled too, but something told me I should not mend matters by doing this. I had better stand my ground. Presently, Gringo came waddling back from the house. He was in a most furious bulldog rage. I had told him a lie, and he was telling himself that he had been a fool to believe me. Mr. Bonstone was never in dining room at this time of the day. Besides that, I had given him an awful fright, and he was no longer quite young. "Gringo," I said, "I thought you were going to kill that dog." He said never a word, but I knew what he was thinking. Couldn't I trust him to know better than to kill a neighbor's dog? He was merely punishing him. I couldn't stand it. I went on. "I was thinking of your reputation." Still, he didn't answer me, and I got angry. "You are too cross with the young dogs," I said. "Everybody says so." This cut him too quick, and he gave me an awful look. Then, for his anger was still burning in him, he had to give me a dig. "I'll never trust you again," he said. Now I was in a rage. I had done the thing for the best. I was trying to keep peace and preserve the good name of our circle of dogs. "You are willfully misunderstanding me," I exclaimed. "A lie is a lie," he said, with a sullen fire in his dark eyes. "You never lied before." "And I never will again," I yelped at him, "unless I see you trying to kill someone." "I wasn't trying to kill him," he retorted. "You looked like it," I said, and we went on arguing and abusing each other for half an hour. We finally got down to the question: is it right to lie under any circumstances? All the dogs heard us yapping and snarling at each other, and they came running and took a tongue in the argument. They were tremendously excited. A row between two old friends like Gringo and myself was a most startling event in our dog circle. Some were for lies, some against. Yegi said a lie was a mighty convenient thing when a dog got in the corner. Sir Walter Scott said it was underbred to lie. Zarnia said to lie with discretion was diplomatic. Weary Winnie said she rather lied than to speak the truth, whereupon she got a nip from Gringo and was sent to bed. Finally, Gringo turned to me in a passion and said, "Get home with you. You make yourself cheap coming here so much." Imagine my feelings. I'm a dog of spirit, and I raced out of that orchid pretty quick. Gringo and I had never had words before, and I was so brokenhearted that I yelped with pain as I ran home. Now, being taken up with myself and listening to the animated barks behind me, for every dog was remonstrating with Gringo for his severity toward me, I did not notice properly the way I was going. Usually I'm what is called an alert dog. I observe what is before and behind and all around me, and ever since the dog show I had been more than ever on the watch, for I remembered the evil looks on the two youths who stared at me. This afternoon I forgot them. I had told a lie and lost a friend, and this melancholy happening chased everything else out of my mind. So I ran blindly and evil fell upon me. I was on what we called the Rock Walk, a long lane between our property and the Bonstones'. Thick-growing alders were each side of it, and I leaped from stone to stone and ran occasionally along grassy places till I was near the osage-orange hedge that surrounded our rose garden. If I had been on my guard, I would have sensed the presence of strangers and would have noticed the rustling in the bushes. As it was, I pulled up too late. Something had just said to me, "Danger ahead. Boy, stop short and go back." I whirled in my tracks, but it was too late. A stranger had stepped out of the bushes. A rope had curled through the air. I was lassoed for the first time in my life. Half choking, I was hurled to the ground. Something gave me a whack on the head, and I was stunned. Only partly, for I have been stolen several times, and I pretended to be more unconscious than I was. I knew better than to cry out. I just saw that the two men bending over me were not the ones who had been at the dog show. They were too clever to come here themselves. These were older men. I knew I was being carried to a motor car, that I was put in a box and run under the seat, and that we sped toward New York. I was terribly unhappy, of course, but not despairing. No one had been able to keep me in a place that I wanted to get out of. I came to myself fully after a bit and lay still and watched events. These fellows were pretending to be electric light or telephone men. Quite often, when other automobiles were passing, they got out and tapped poles in a knowing way. They wore big leather belts and they dragged about ropes and coils of wire. I could look out of a crack in the box and I heard sounds that I pieced together. I did not know by which road we were going toward the city, but something told me after the lapse of an hour or two that we were in the Mount Vernon or Pelham Manor district. I lay low and went on saying nothing. After a time, I felt the car stop, and my box was taken up and carried into some kind of a shed. A door was banged together, the box was opened, and 4 young men's faces confronted me. 2 of them were the ones I had noticed at the dog show. They had paid, or were going to pay, the others for stealing me. I was ordered to get out, and in a way that was not too feeble nor too lively, I crawled out on the earth floor. They had stolen me to sell. I knew that, and I knew also this was not the time to see about escaping. I was really exhausted, for mental worry is as fatiguing to animals as to human beings, and I just dropped down on a heap of straw. "Ain't much to look at," said one of the men who had stolen me. "It's points," said one of the white-faced youths. "I don't understand the gab about it, but he's worth 7,000, all right." Their talk was dreadful, all tarnished with oaths and strange slangs that of course I shall translate, for it's not fit to repeat. Poor fools, poor young fools, I thought as I looked at them. If master could only get at you, but you belong to the class he dreads, that pale-faced, anemic lot without morals and with absolutely nothing to work on. It seems as if ill health and crowding and poverty make a criminal class that is most desperate, for you can't do much with it. These 2 poor wretches should have been locked up and carefully watched. All the time I was with them, I did not hear one decent word uttered by them. I did not see one decent action performed. They were rotten through and through. I tried not to be revengeful as I listened to them. The two fellows who had stolen me were more decent than the two others. They were clamoring for their money, but they were assured none would be forthcoming till I was sold. They detailed with disgust and glee how they had hung about Pleasant River all day, pretending to be telephone men. He's cute, they said in describing me. He gives strangers a wide berth. We most got him twice, but he veered off and ran down the road, not minding us in particular, but just 'cause he's cute. I groaned inwardly. I remembered these two fellows who had even had the audacity to come up near the house and examine our poles. Finally, they went away, and my two jockeys went to a rough table in the corner of the shed, took up a black bottle, and shook it. I had no fear of their injuring me. I was too valuable for that. In a minute, it flashed upon me what they were going to do. I was to be dyed. I smiled sardonically. My dear master would raise heaven and earth to find me. A little dye would not turn him off the track. I hoped they would be careful about my eyes, and they were, for one man rebuked the other sharply for letting the brush come too near an eyelid. Nothing was to be done to me that would take anything off my market value. I felt like a fool, though, as they set me on a rough table and went all over my hair with the brush. How the other dogs would laugh if they saw me. A white wired hair fox terrier has some style. An all black one, none whatever. However, I just made up my mind to submit. There was absolutely no use in worrying, and for tonight, I need not fatigue my brain by thoughts of escape. When I had been stolen before, I had learned to take my capture easily, till my captors were off their guard, which they never were at first. I must wait some days. One thing I had done before when trapped was to pretend to like my captors. That role would not take here. These two fellows had no more comprehension of the dog world than if they had been wooden men. They loved no one, feared no one. They seemed to hate everybody, even each other. It was no use to try to cajole them. So I just pretended to submit without looking too happy or appearing to be ill, for then they would have dosed me. So I let them dye me and tie me, or rather chain me to a stout iron bar run down into the earth. They pried off my collar, made a hole in the ground and buried it, and put a new very strong metal one on me. They acted as if they knew I was a dog with brains, but I fancy their motive was simply one inspired by native cunning and skill in stealing. They must take every precaution to ensure success of their scheme. Well, at last I was free to lay down on my bed of straw. One of them stayed with me while the other went into the shabby house attached to the shed and brought me out a plate of meat. Then they set a pan of water beside me and went into the house, leaving the door open. I could not make a movement without their hearing me. End of chapter 26. Recording by Catalino Rodriguez on the web at catalinorodriguez.com.
Chapter 27. Weary Days and a Rescue. There is no use in recounting the weary days and nights that passed. I soon figured out the whole story. These two scamps, after finding out my value at the dog show, had set inquiries on foot in the underworld, and had found out that there was a demand for wire-haired fox terriers on the Pacific coast. If they could ship me out there, they would get even a little more than the $7,000. The question was to raise the money for a railway ticket. Someone must accompany me. Day after day I heard them arguing. They brought out men and women, too, from New York. They would say that it was a sure thing. Anyone who went in with them would be well rewarded. But everybody seemed shy of advancing enough money for my ticket and one of theirs to California. All these difficulties pleased me. I, of course, viewed with dismay a trip to California. Unfortunately for me, a day came when a middle-aged man, who was the leader of a gang of forgers, seemed to fall in with their scheme. He had succeeded in passing a worthless check on a trust company, and was feeling very rich. He told my young men that he would advance them $150 if they would give him $1,000 when I was sold. They were in a fury with him, and vowed they'd see him elsewhere first. However, I heard them talking the thing over after he left, and I trembled as they seemed to come to a decision in his favor. I knew from their talk that my dear master was advertising me much more extensively than they had ever imagined he would, and that there were a great many uncertainties connected with selling me, even in so far away a place as California. It was only by a quick sale that they could hope to get rid of me anywhere. Then they were afraid that some of their gang, in spite of the danger to themselves on account of their criminal record, would notify the police of my whereabouts to claim the reward. They had no confidence in anyone. On their blue days they sometimes went far enough to regret ever having meddled with me, and I was in torture lest some treachery on the part of their gangster friends would make them kill me and run away to hide themselves. Finally, however, they promised to let the forger have the $1,000 when I was sold, though they assured him that recent developments made it impossible for them to ask the full price for me. They were not sure that the forger would keep his promise about letting them have the $150. Talk about honor among thieves! The criminal world, as I heard about it from my corner in the shed, is dishonorable, untrue, frightfully selfish. There is no such thing as honor in it. I must confess that I had an idea that there is something fascinating about crime. The night Master and Mr. Bonstone went to New York to warn the police about the planned burglary of the jeweller's store, I had been secretly disappointed when they let Mr. Johnson follow the affair up and we went home. I didn't want a burglary to take place or rogues to be apprehended, but if the thing just had to be done, I wanted to see how burglars and police went about it. But now my dog's soul was filled with the most awful and secret disgust and dread of this criminal life. It was nauseating. I wished to sweep it from the earth. At first I listened to the talk, then I buried my head in the straw. Such things were not fit for even a dog to hear. I concentrated my attention on myself. I must escape. But how? There seemed not one single avenue open to me. I had always had a theory that no man and no dog can be put in any place so tight that he can't get out of it. But I seemed to be in such a place now. I could think of absolutely nothing to do. The scheme of these young villains was a very simple but a very cunning one. By instinct and habit they were natives of the very downest part of New York. They had brought me to the country to escape the keen eyes of the New York police, who, as I have said before, are, in spite of the criticism they receive, a pretty fine body of men. The paler of the villains posed as a victim of tuberculosis. His brother, who was not his brother at all, had hired this tumble-down cottage as a place for him to breathe fresh air and recover in. Whenever they heard anyone coming, this Dud, as he was called, would flop down on a rickety old sofa drawn up close to an open window. I was his devoted black dog, kept for company, while his brother, who was a hard-working baker, was away in New York. He had to be a baker, for his flabby hands never could have belonged to a man who worked out of doors. This pose was very clever, for it brought them in lots of food. A good, kind clergyman told some of the ladies in his congregation about the poor, sick young New Yorker who had such a bad cough, and they came often and brought nourishing things to eat. How my blood boiled when I saw these nice women driving up in their cars and sending their servants in with dainty dishes for these two rapscallions, who ate them and grumbled because there was not more wine in the jellies. To add to my misery, the dear old widow who owned the Lady Gay cat found out about her needy neighbours, and came quite often with little bowls of custard. My first impulse when I saw her was to spring to my feet and bark wildly. However, I lay down again. She would not recognize me. I was a black dog now. The cat would know me, but then the cat never came with her, and even if she had, at a hint of recognition from anyone, I would be spirited away. So I had to content myself with wagging my tail violently whenever she appeared, and I always got a kind pat on the head. One day, when I was terribly weary from my long confinement, and was quite a bit downcast, for I did not see how I was ever going to get away, I became desperate. A beautiful old lady with a high-bred manner was standing in the cottage, which was a one-room affair, talking to Dud, who was prone on the sofa, coughing in a hollow way. I began to wail softly, and she turned round, and looking out in the shed at me, said, "I should think you would have your dog in here for company. The room is cold, for you have only a feeble fire. He could lie on the sofa and keep you warm." The lady had been there before, and I knew she liked dogs, for she wore a little button with "Be kind to animals" on it. Dud was too cunning to be caught. "I often have him in here, ma'am," he said. "I just put him out there before you came." "Let him loose," she said. "I would like to see him run about." "He's tired," said Dud. "He was running all morning." He was watching her face as he spoke, and he must have noticed a flash of suspicion, for he added hastily, "Perhaps he does want to come in. I'll try him for a while. He likes to lie behind my back." And getting up, he limped out to the shed. I was trembling with anger at his lies. He unfastened my chain and took me in his arms. His face was hateful as he bent over me. I would have to pay up for this. He was holding me, apparently in a loose grasp, yet his left hand gripped one of my hind legs till it felt as if it were caught in the jaws of a trap. I might have known better than to do what I did, but I didn't. I made an effort to get to the kind lady. Her face made me wildly homesick, for it reminded me of my dear mistress and Mrs. Bonstone. Then I was unutterably tired and heartsick. 3 weeks had passed since I had been shut up with this vermin of manhood. I tried to spring toward her, but my leg caught in the trap. I gave a yell of pain. I thought my jailer had broken it. Dud was mighty clever. He let me go at once. He knew I could not run far with that aching leg. "Poor dog," he said, as I limped to a corner and began to lick it. "Did the rheumatiz come back? I'll get you a bone." And he went to a shelf and took down a piece of beef that he had reserved for himself. What a fool I am, I thought, and I lay down by the stove and ripped the meat off the bone, for they kept me pretty hungry. The lady was reassured, for Dud, in a skilful manner that amazed me, petted me as if he worshipped the ground I walked on. I would not wag my tail and pretend I liked him, but I tore at the meat, for I knew I should lose my bone and probably get a beating when the lady was gone. I never looked at her, as her chauffeur, who had been standing outside, opened the door for her. Dud was very careful to keep between me and the door, but he did not need to trouble. I felt that the time to escape had not come. Of course I got my beating. He snatched the bone from me and caught up an old broom. I shall carry the mark of that beating to the end of my life in a most ungraceful limp, for my poor sore leg seemed always to be next to the broom. I tried to keep my head out of the range of the blows. I had a terror of being blind. Fortunately, his companion vermin came in while he was belabouring me, and I, poor dog, was flying from corner to corner, from under the stove to the rickety sofa to the shaky bedstead, to escape from that horrible broom handle. His companion, who was fresh from some nest of evil things in the city, called him a whole trainload of dreadful names. They lost their tempers and they fought. Was I sorry? I crouched under the bed and tried to discipline myself. I murmured, "I am a respectable dog. I should grieve to see 2 young men so depraved. I should be sorry to see them giving each other blows. Now Dud is down. His eye is laid open. I am terribly pained." I turned my head away and thought I looked intensely sorry. But alas, an old tin pan that still had some shine on it stood leaning against the baseboard, and I saw reflected in it a distorted doggy grin. Well, Dud yelled so loudly that Tyke, as his chum is called, had to desist. The postman often passed about this time in the afternoon. They sat down and glared at each other like 2 young tigers. No, not tigers. Tigers are too noble. I can't think of any animal bad enough to compare them with. Hyenas would have looked like gentlemen if set beside them. Anyway, they sat and glowered while Dud tied a wet towel to his injured eye. Then they got more composed, and Tyke told his good news. I and Dud were to set off for California the following week. He had got the money. Dud wanted to handle it, but Tyke shook his head and exhibited just the corners of some bills sticking out of an inner pocket. From composure they passed to contentment. They were both frightfully tired of their long sojourn in the country. Listening to them, and consulting my own feelings as I looked back on 3 weeks of being chained up, I concluded that the worst torture in the world for man or beast is to be torn away from home and family and a happy, active life, and to have nothing to do but to think about yourself and your misery. Finally Tyke picked me up almost tenderly, and told Dud, for the 50th time, what kind of a fool he was to beat a $7,000 dog, and rechained me to my iron bar. Then they sat down again and confronted each other. They were in high glee. They thought they saw several $1,000s glittering alluringly ahead of them in far-off California. 1,000 they would have to give to their friend. No, not their friend. They hadn't any. To their fellow plotter. They just had to do something to celebrate. In New York, a dozen ways of jollification of their own sort would have been open to them. In this country place there were but 2 things. Tyke went out and got some bottles somewhere. Then they pulled down all the blinds, locked the house door and the outer shed door, lighted an old lamp, and sat down at a table with some cards between them. They hadn't a suspicion that I would try to escape. Apparently I was beaten almost to a jelly, but I am a very strong dog, and I wasn't half as done out as I appeared to be. Tyke cast a glance at me occasionally as I lay on my straw bed, but soon he got interested in the cards and the bottles and forgot all about me. As I lay there I was doing some pretty hard thinking. Never before in my whole life had I felt as I was now feeling. I was on fire with anger, and I felt the strength of 10 dogs in my body. I had had all the worries and trials of an average dog in the course of my life, but this rage of resentment was an absolutely new experience. A most profound sympathy for all tortured things came over me. I pitied all the suffering men and women in the world, the children and the poor dumb animals. Then I arranged my little plan of escape. In the morning I would either be away from this place or so done out that I didn't care what happened to me. First thing, I must get some rest. Nothing could be done until the 2 young brutes inside had been put to sleep by the stuff in the bottles. I am a pretty determined dog, and I made myself drop into a heavy slumber. About 1 o'clock I woke up. The most extraordinary snoring duet I ever heard in my life was going on in the room beyond me, and I could see where the 2 poor wretches had thrown themselves, undressed, across the bed. They were safe for some hours. The lamp was just smoking out. It would soon be dark, but I knew every inch of the ground about me, and the darkness would not interfere with what I had to do. For the 1,000th time since my captivity, I smelt round the iron bar to which I was chained. That bar had to come out of the ground. There was no other way of escape, for it was impossible for me to detach my metal collar from the steel chain that fastened me to the bar. I must dig my way out. Fortunately, my legs are very muscular, for I have been a dog that has taken a great deal of exercise, and in back of me are generations of fox terriers trained to unearth foxes in old England. The hind leg that Dud had pinched was horribly sore and wobbly, and at first seemed almost useless. "None of that nonsense," I said sternly to it. "You've got to be stood on." So I propped myself on it as best I could, and began to clear the earth away from that uncompromising bar. It was a hard task, I cannot deny that. All over the shed the earth had been trodden on until it was apparently as firm as marble. But even marble can be penetrated, and I scratched and clawed till I had dug a small hole. After that it was easier, the earth underneath was softer. But ah me, how my paws began to ache. I found the best way to manage was to dig until I dropped exhausted to the ground, Then I would close my eyes and rest my aching limbs for a few minutes. Just as soon as possible I would get up, prop myself firmly on my one sound leg, rest the tender one gingerly on the earth, and start digging again. When the first faint streaks of daylight came filtering through the broken boards of the roof, I had got the bar uprooted, and had begun to tunnel under the boards of the shed wall. My strength was almost gone. I had to take long times of resting and short ones of digging. My claws were all worn off, and my paws were bleeding. I had to set my teeth and think of master and mistress and all my beloved friend dogs to enable me to keep to work. Once I thought I was done for. One of the sleeping beauties in the room got off the bed, floundered about, and acted as if he were coming out to call on me. My first thought was to spring up and try to cover the hole I had made with straw, but that would have been an impossibility. I lay still and wondered what was going to happen next. Tyke, for it was he that was stirring, had the will but not the power to get to the shed, and falling into a heap on the floor, he went to snoring again. I tried to get up and go on with my work, but it seemed as if I were paralyzed. "Oh, for a stimulus," I muttered. "My limbs are dead." And just here something happened that was little short of miraculous. It seems a far cry from that shed to a little black cat in New York more than 2 years before, but it wasn't. The Lady Gay cat that I had befriended, and who belonged to the good old widow Gorman, was named Molly. In common with all pussies, she had a habit of night prowling. She was a cautious cat, and after her New York experience she never went far from home. But on this particular night, she told me afterward, something had prompted her to wander further than usual. She was just getting home, for it was near morning, when in crossing the field near the cottage she heard the sound of my digging. It aroused her curiosity, and she came smelling round the shed. She soon caught a suggestion of me, and she mewed excitedly, for she had heard the widow tell about my being stolen from the kind gentleman who used to come sometimes to the cottage. Her voice was the stimulus I needed. I put my muzzle close to a crack in the board wall and squealed gently. "Here I am, Molly." "Are you with the black dog of the sick man?" she mewed. "I am the black dog, Molly," I said. "I'm trying to dig myself out. I'm most dead." "Oh, boy," she said, "how I wish I could help you." "You can," I replied. "Run and get your German police dog. I heard your granny tell the 2 young men that her sons had sent her one to guard her, for they were afraid something might happen to her in your lonely cottage." "Of course," she said. "Good Oscar, he's very intelligent." "Fly," I begged her. "They may wake any time." The little cat scampered away, and soon I heard a few stealthy sounds outside, and then a long indrawn sniff from Oscar, and a stifled woof. He was locating me. The cat had explained the circumstances to him, as they ran along together. He signalled to me to begin at my end of the tunnel. I started digging like a wild dog, and he began tunnelling to meet me. His paws are magnificent, so big and strong, and he had the acute hearing of a healthy dog. He could even hear my heart beating as I worked. In a very few minutes I was down on the earth, crawling on my stomach out through my tunnel into his. I fell on the grass in a heap. Oscar gave me one rapid lick, then ran his nose over the bar and chain. "Come, come," urged Molly, who was trembling with excitement. "It's getting quite light." It seemed still dark to me, for I was almost blind with fatigue. That sagacious dog picked up the bar in his strong white teeth, walked slowly ahead, and I dragged myself after him. That walk to the widow's house was a nightmare of pain. I was tormented in every limb. Molly ran ahead and mewed at the back door, and the widow, who was half-dressed only, opened it and stared at us in amazement. "The black dog," she said, "and Molly with him, and Oscar carrying his bar. Goodness gracious, what does this mean?" In the midst of my pain and confusion, I remembered that I must identify myself. I crawled to the corner of the fireplace where she always set my saucer of milk when master was having his cup of tea, for we often called here when out automobiling. I squealed and tried to jump in the air, but tumbled forward instead. Good old Granny was very sharp. She gave me a perfectly amazed look, and then she screamed, "Good London! It's the Granton dog! But black, so black," she added. She dashed to the water bucket, seized a towel, wet it, and began to rub my coat. "It's Di!" she screamed again. "My goodness! My goodness! My goodness!" The dear old soul caught me up, bar and chain, dirty and bedraggled, ran to her own bed and put me on it. Then she flew to the telephone that her boys had given her and called up Central. The girl who answered was called Minnie, and was a particular friend of the old woman's. "Minnie," she gasped, "the police! Quick! It's Granny Gorman speaking. I've found the Granton dog that's been so much advertised. He was over in the cottage by the grove with that sick young man. A man that's bad enough to steal a dog would hurt a helpless old woman. Quick, Minnie!" Mrs. Gorman let the receiver drop, flew to the back door and locked it, flew to the front door and locked that. Then she put down all the windows and locked them. Then she got a bottle of milk and put some in my mouth with a teaspoon. Never again will anything taste to me as that milk did. My body was frightfully tired, but my mind followed acutely what went on. Oscar, who had pushed his head under a window shade and was staring in the direction of the other cottage, gave a warning bark. Mrs. Gorman stepped to the window, then she joined her hands, cast a pleading look toward the ceiling, and said, "Oh, Lord, they're coming." Oscar told me afterward that the sight of those two confused, staggering young fellows zigzagging across the field made him grin. They had not recovered from the effects of their rejoicing, but something in their poor brains had warned them to set out in chase of their lost property. They were following the tracks of the chain which had dragged on the earth, and every time they stopped to look they would fall down. Oscar said afterward that it was a dreadful thing to laugh at drunken men, but he couldn't help shaking his sides over their antics. Soon they got up to the house, and after cutting the telephone wire, they staggered through the garden to the front door. After they had pounded a short time, Mrs. Gorman went to the little hall window, and without raising it, looked out at them. They called her some very fancy names, and ordered her to let them in. "What for?" she screamed through the glass. "You're not in a state to make calls. Go home." "Give us our dog," they yelled, pounding on the door with their fists. "I haven't got your dog," the widow called back to them. Then she realized she had made a mistake. She didn't want them to know that she had discovered that I was the Granton dog. "That good dog doesn't want to live with you," she shouted. "He scratched his way out. You'd better let me keep him." This excited the two young scamps, and they began throwing themselves against the door and kicking it. "You mustn't do that," she exclaimed. "Breaking into a house is a penitentiary offence." Dud and Tyke were pretty well worked up now. They knew their case was desperate. They must get hold of me and rush off to New York. The shock had sobered them, and one of them smashed the hall window with his fist and ran his hand in to unlock the door. "Don't do that," said the widow, much more calmly. "Don't do that." And she threw the door wide open. "Come in." They were a very cunning pair. Dud stood outside while Tyke entered. He came right to the bed, snatched a key from his pocket, and unlocking my collar, released me from the bar and chain, and took me in his arms. "Come, come, young man," said the widow coaxingly. "That dog is afraid of you. Leave him with me." I felt Tyke give a kind of jerk. He had sense enough to know that he should not leave a suspicious person behind him. He wanted to find out what she had in her mind. "I hope in future you will mind your own business," he said roughly, "and not take in a runaway dog." "But I like dogs," she said gently, and as she spoke she laid a hand on Oscar's collar. The intelligent dog stood watching her. At a word he would have leaped on Tyke, and Tyke knew it. "Don't play any tricks with me, doggy," he said in a hateful way, and he half pulled a neat little revolver from his pocket. "Please put that back," said Granny Gorman. "I hate guns." "I'll not hurt you," said Tyke, "if you don't hurt me." "Why should I hurt you?" asked the widow mildly. "I don't know," said Tyke sullenly. Then he went on, "I'm off for home." The widow detained him. "Promise me you'll be kind to that dog in future," she said. Tyke made this promise readily enough, and then he tried to escape. He was reassured in his own mind that the widow knew nothing of the value of the dog in his arms. He found it hard to get away. Mrs. Gorman took him by the sleeve. She poured out a perfect volume of talk about dumb animals and the importance of being kind to them. At last Tyke said rudely, "Let me go," and pulled away from her. Just as quickly as he pulled away, he shrank back. The milkman, who was a big husky countryman, had just drawn his wagon up before the little garden, and was coming up the walk to the front door with 2 bottles of milk in his hand. From my place of vantage in Tyke's arms I saw a surprised look flit over the widow's face. Evidently the milkman usually came to the back door. Then, through the half-open door, we all listened to what he was saying to Dud, who stood part way up the walk. "Hello," said the milkman. "How's your cough? You're out early for a sick man." "Better," said Dud in a stifled voice. "I was upset about my dog. Came to get him. He ran away." "Did he?" said the milkman indifferently. Then his eye fell on the broken glass. "Hi," he said in a drawling voice. "Looks as if the widder had been getting gay." "She's all right," said Dud gruffly. "I guess my dog did it. He often rampages round and breaks things." "That medium-sized black feller," said the milkman, "always looks as mild as milk to me." "Oh, he's awful when he gets started," said Dud. "A regular spitfire. That's why we keep him chained. I say, you're not going near the station, are you?" "Yes, I am," said the milkman in a careless way. "Within 100 feet. Want a lift?" "You bet," said Dud. "I'm beginning to feel bad. I guess I'll go up to town and see my doctor." "Jump in, then," said the milkman hospitably, and setting down his bottles he went toward the back of the wagon and appeared to be moving something inside. Dud looked over his shoulder and called out, "Come on, Tyke," and then he started toward the wagon. Oscar and I both sensed the presence of strangers. The milkman was fooling these 2 young men. I watched the hair rising and falling on Oscar's back, and wondered at his self-control, for he sat quietly near the window waiting for orders. The wagon was a big one, drawn by 2 powerful horses. We saw Dud approach the front of it. He was going to take the seat with the milkman, and let Tyke crawl in behind with me. The first one always took the best thing. He climbed up to the seat, and was just about to sit down, when he stopped short and gazed into the back of the wagon. The milkman gave a great roar of laughter. "They're only bottles. Go in and look at them," and he gave the slender Dud a push that sent him disappearing from view. Tyke had seen his companion start, and I knew from the tremor of his body that he was vaguely suspicious of something, he knew not what. He didn't know what to do, and his eyes were glued to the milkman's face as he came again toward the house and seized his bottles. "Come on, Tyke," called Dud suddenly from inside the wagon. Now Tyke was reassured. He clutched me closer, stepped out in quite a steady manner. But he did not get far. The milkman, grinning in a most alarming way, raised his bottles, jerked their contents into Tyke's face, wetting me more than my captor, and in no wise discommoding me, for my body was on fire. Tyke, in his astonishment, struck out at the milkman, and I was slipping to the ground when the milkman caught me and stood jeering at the confounded Tyke, who went staggering into the arms of two policemen who had sprung out from the wagon. Dud was inside with handcuffs on. The policemen had got the milkman to bring them to the cottage. They didn't want any shooting, and when they drew Dud into the back part of the wagon, he, to curry favour with them, called to his companion. Well, that was the last of my two enemies for me. I never expect to see them again. They were never accused of stealing me. It was found that they belonged to a gang that had swindled big New York concerns, and they will probably serve a long term in prison for their previous crimes. My dear master was asked to intervene on their behalf, but he said, "They will be with a good warden. Years ago I might have done something. Now it is too late for any mild measures. They have sinned deeply, and they need the discipline of punishment." End of Chapter 27. Recording by Maria Casper.